Hello and welcome back to Equipped. This is episode 3. I'm still Aaron Garner.
I'm Harry Lansley.
And today we're going to have an interesting discussion because there's a new film out. It's Inside Out 2. For those people that haven't seen the first Inside Out film, go and see it. It's a great film. And I'm going to go and see that with my son for his birthday, which is tomorrow.
Nice.
He's going to be 9 years old. So I'm going to see that this weekend. So hopefully we've got another episode coming up, doing a bit of a movie review next.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to go watch it Sunday morning, and then hopefully we can chat about that next week because there's a couple of new characters in this one. So the first one that most people are familiar with, we've got the 5 emotional characters. So we've got disgust, fear, happiness, angry, and sad. And then in this one, they've introduced some new characters. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about those new ones.
Yes, we've got the addition of 4 new characters, and that is ennui, embarrassment, envy, and anxiety. And we're going to save a discussion on those 4 new emotions, and I'll put that in inverted commas, for our next episode, I think.
Okay, excellent. But to get back to today's episode, we were having a little chat about this yesterday, and we're like, what are we going to chat about tomorrow? And we felt parenting is one that we're both familiar with. We're both parents. I've got 1 5-year-old girl. You've got 3 boys. So we thought maybe we could have a little discussion about that, talk about some of the things we found tricky, some of the things we found enjoyable, and some of the lessons we kind of learned along the way about having kids. And the emotional journey that comes with that, because it's fulfilling, but it's really hard as well.
It definitely is. It definitely is. From the get-go, I think, having that, the newborn baby stage, especially your first newborn baby, everybody gives you advice on what you should be doing. So you've got all of that going on. And then, the actual reality bites pretty quick, I think, early on. I mean, how did you find it when, you were first dealing with your daughter?
Yeah, really, really hard the first year. I mean, it remains hard. Don't get me wrong. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me, but it does come with its challenges. And 5 years on, I'm still learning, because the thing with the kid is the kid almost becomes a completely different child every single year. New language comes on, new friends come on, new influences, new interests. So you're always playing catch up, and it's a lot of fun, but it does require a lot of emotional intelligence, I find, to actually handle the raising of a kid for them and for me.
Definitely.
Yeah,
and it's I remember and I'm sure many of you out there that have been through it as well, the crying, and I'm not talking about the baby, but shouts out my wife and I both crying on the first night because the baby was crying, and that kind of self-doubt about, I'm a terrible parent, I don't know what to do, and all of that, all of that stuff just coming down onto you, because now you're responsible for a real life human being.
It's absolutely bonkers though, isn't it? Like you have a kid, and then, you might be in the hospital for a day, and then you are literally walking out holding a child just going, I don't know what I'm doing. And that first night is terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
Definitely. And I think this is where all those skills come in that we talk about. And it's all very easy for us to say, the emotional intelligence skills, the self-awareness, self-management, other awareness, social awareness piece, and then the interactional management. And it's all really important. So just do those things. As a parent, it's easy. Once you know those things and you need to do these things, you just do them.
Yeah.
That's all we have to do, right?
But we struggle with it.
So that's what everybody struggles with. I think that's the thing about people. We kind of beat ourselves up a little bit. And even as people that work in the area of emotional intelligence, I personally will catch myself time to time. It's been a busy day. You come home from work, and we love our jobs, but sometimes you're tired at the end of the day, and then it's like dad, and then the demands come in there again, and it's that. Sometimes I think that self-awareness piece of where am I right now, and am I in the right place to respond effectively with my child, We don't always do that when we walk in, and sometimes you'll find yourself snapping, or your voice will raise because you're annoyed, and then hopefully you catch yourself.
Yeah.
But sometimes we make mistakes, and I think it's important to embrace those elements.
100%. I think one of the things I learned, I'm still learning now, to be fair, is when you do mess up, and you will, everybody does, and the emotional drain that comes with having a child will mean you will make emotionally based mistakes often, is you have to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
And almost treat it as a bit of a learning process rather than an albatross around your neck of like, I snapped at my kid and now I feel terrible and, you know, they're never going to love me the same and all that kind of stuff. Is you will make mistakes. Kids will forgive you. You have to forgive yourself. Because there has been times when I have lost it with my kid. And particularly in the early days, what I used to do, I've got a little bit better at kind of handling things on the fly now. But back then, I used to almost have a bit of a mental processing session at the end of the day. And I kind of go through all the questionable interactions I'd had that day, you know, and try and process it and think how I could do better. And I did that pretty much every single night. Now I'm a little bit better. Like if I do kind of snap at the kid or whatever, it probably takes me 20 seconds to then go, oh, that was out of order. And then I can go back, have the conversation and explain. And vice versa. If, you know, if Kira needs a conversation because she's doing something, I often take those 20, 30 seconds to just quickly go, how am I going to deal with this, rather than kind of going on the attack, her getting defensive. It's like, how do we get the actual lesson out of it?
Yeah.
And forgiveness is definitely a big part of being a parent and not beating yourself up too much, I think.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think years ago we were talking so I've got 3 boys. So I've got Addison, who's 9 tomorrow. Shout out to Addison.
Nice.
Birthday
Happy
tomorrow. And yeah, so he's 9 tomorrow. And then I've got a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old one, so who's now left home, first one, feeling old. And I remember when Finn was younger and I was working at home on this particular day, and he came in and wanted my attention, and I snapped straight away. Bear in mind, we work in this field. And I snapped, I'm busy, you know, and you do that kind of raised voice. And I was quite stressed on that particular day, but I hadn't identified how stressed I was. And I think that's the thing. And so he just disappeared. But luckily straight away, you know, I caught that and did that kind of, okay, right, that wasn't fair. It's not there. It's not Finn's fault. And, you know, go to find him. And you do that. Okay, I'm really sorry. You do the apology, but not just the apology. So the explanation, because I think that models good emotional intelligence as
100%,
well.
You need to understand it.
So as you were saying there, if you're modeling, I did this, it was wrong. This is why I did those things. You know, and then you try and kind of build it up so that in the apology you get that learning piece you were just talking about. All of these mistakes we make can become really good learning opportunities.
Absolutely.
That help children, especially when they're younger, because when they're, you know, in their early years, that kind of 3-year-old, 4-year-old, so much development going on from a brain point of view. Most of the brain development is happening there. You mentioned, like, you know, the changes each year with new words and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
we can make big mistakes if we don't do those reparations when things go wrong. And modelling in that stage is really important, because
100%.
Stuff they learn then is going to carry through their adolescent and adult life if we don't deal with it in the right way there and then.
And I can't believe, so Kira was my first child, she's 5 now. I can't believe how clever young kids are. Not just like from a language perspective, but she, and I'm sure other kids as well, have this unbelievable way to read a room. And it's a simple question like, hey Kira, who's the better cook, mummy or daddy? And she won't engage because she's already thinking about hurting someone else's feelings. Now, if you get her in a room on her own and say it, she'll be like, yeah, Daddy, you're a better cook. Like,
of course you would, Harry, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Who's more funny? She's like, yeah, it's mummy. But she'll never do it in the room because her ability to understand what she says can have an impact on how someone else feels. at that age, I just didn't think that would be the case. And it really is. And then if you flip it, it just means she will also feel it when you don't reflect properly when she's in the room. Because a lot of the time with the kid, you feel like you can get away with stuff because they're not necessarily going to pick it up in the way that you actually mean it with, let's say you're having a conversation with an adult. You think you could have that conversation, and because it's high level conversation, the kid won't take it in. They take it in.
They definitely do.
And it might be the next day or a couple of days, even a week goes by, and they'll bring something up in that conversation. You go, oh my God, right, you are picking up absolutely everything. I need to be more careful.
Yeah.
And I've made that mistake countless times, thinking she's not going to understand the complexity of this conversation, and she does.
Yeah. No, it's really important. Kids are really clever, and they are radars for bad words as well.
Unbelievably so, yeah.
So they'll pick those up and call you out. Normally, if a bad word's mentioned, we tend not to use too many bad words, but if they do come out, you are definitely called out on it. But I think there's so much of an impact on and responsibility on parents to make sure that they have good emotional intelligence for that purpose, so that their child models it. It's not that you have to sit down and go through the quadrants of emotional intelligence per se, but I think modeling good emotional regulation, and when you do fail in that regulation of your emotion, highlighting why, because I think, as we just said, there's a bit of a learning there. But also that kind of validation piece, that empathy as well, that it's okay to feel certain ways as well, is really important. For example, movies. Go to see Inside Out. We've mentioned Inside Out already. I will cry at the drop of a hat at emotional points in movies. Chantal, my wife, finds that absolutely hilarious, how quickly I will cry in movies. But I'm modelling that almost, not intentionally, but Addison, my youngest, will do that too. And I think that's good in that, if you're emotional, you can let it out. It's not the old school boys don't cry kind of mentality. That might be my kind of grandfather's kind of period. That stiff upper lip, don't show emotion, those kinds of things. And I think so that validation of, when one of my children is angry, just validating, it's clear that you're angry about this. I get it. It's okay. Rather than that, sort yourself out. Wipe that look off your face. That kind of.
It's a lesson in empathy, isn't it? And in that scenario, you're applying empathy to your child, and in the film scenario, you're applying empathy to the character. And that's actually find that really useful for practicing empathy. It sounds weird to say practice empathy, but it is something you can practice. It is something you can get better at doing with time. And I often do it with a film. It's almost. And it is sad because I cry at films all the time. But the more I make a conscious effort to empathize, the more I enjoy the film. And the more kind of emotional lessons I can take from it. So I always find kind of really even Toy Story, literally putting yourself in the shoes of Woody, you can take valuable emotional lessons from that story because you can understand everything from his perspective. And if you can do that, it makes it easier to deal with other people, handle emotionally charged situations, and then hopefully pass that on to your kid.
Excellent. Yeah. It's one of those things, and whether it's a happy or a sad thing in a movie, I'll generally emphasize. Romantic comedies, they get me every time. So a rom-com, I'm just laying this out now on a podcast. But rom-coms, that happy moment when they get together at the end, and that will get me every single time. I will probably cut this, but and when it comes to that, that validation piece, empathy is really, really important. But we tend to flip into, and this isn't just with your kids as well. I think as parents, we tend to become, like the other parent will say to each other, no, we shouldn't do it that way, or you should do it that way. There's a different parenting style between people. So I think consistency is really important for parenting, obviously. But we talk about those different styles of empathic communication. Or advisory kind of communication, searching communication, asking questions, and critical. It's very easy to flip into that, especially with children, to flip into that critical element. That don't do that, that's wrong. Don't say. Now, there are some things where you kind of have to be the critical parent, I think, when they're doing something that's dangerous, obviously. But sometimes it'd be very quick to drop into that critical parent and not think from their point of view and take a more empathetic approach, I think.
So you talked about a few of the communication styles there. Mm-hmm. Could you explain the other ones to us as well? So you've got searching, advising, critical, and empathetic.
Yeah, so you've got the empathetic, which is that kind of looking at from other people's point of view. You know, how do they feel, and kind of embrace, as we've just talked, we talked quite a bit about the empathy side. Searching is looking for understanding. So searching is more about asking questions to find out more about what's going on. And that can be very, very useful when paired with empathy.
Yeah.
But it can be a bit interrogatory if you overdo that kind of questioning piece, and can come across sometimes a bit like a therapy session rather than a conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
And again, if it's a therapy session, then that's great. The advising is instantly, and we all do that. People out there, you'll all have had this at some point when someone says they have a problem or they're doing something, and I've got a better solution for that. I know exactly how to fix this situation or solve this problem, and we're very quick to want to help.
Yeah.
And as humans, we like to do that. So that I say, oh, no, what you need to do is this. And as soon as we come into that, and it could be with the parent, the other parent in the relationship, or it might be to the child, it's sometimes better just to do the empathetic piece, do some empathy, and help them to come up with a solution for themselves is more effective long-term than giving people an answer. 100%. Which may not be the answer for them. Yeah. So it's very much that, okay, it'll work for you, but may not be for them.
Yeah, and I mean, for kids, that's an absolutely fantastic approach, is to allow them to find it themselves, because it's quick and easy to tell a kid what to do. It takes longer and it's more difficult and emotionally challenging to take them on the ride to figure it out. But once they're there, job's done. They don't need you to come back again and advise them about the same thing.
Yeah.
So that kind of empathic teaching works so effectively with young children.
It does, yeah. And an avoidance of critical where possible. And this, coming on to teaching, this comes into education as well. So we're talking from a parenting point of view, but from a teaching point of view, having that kind of empathetic element there. There is obviously elements of advising in any kind of role where you are guiding people. Then you would have some of that. But searching is really important from an educational point of view. You're trying to get students, pupils in primary school or upwards, or nursery upwards, asking questions. What do you think about that? And letting them come to their own conclusions. And I think the same thing works in education as it does in parenting. So, avoiding critical where possible, because those messages, especially early on in those early years periods, will stick. And a lot of those critical messages about not being good enough, or you can't do that, you mustn't do that, you shouldn't do that. People will think of this, you're this kind of person, you're that kind of person, and making those critical judgments about your children stick hard.
Yeah.
And, when they're teens, when they're adults, those messages are sometimes there. Is where we get a lot of our messages of self-doubt and those kinds of things, is often those kind of messages that we got from wider society or people we perceived as more parental, authoritarian kind of positions. Could be teachers, those kinds of things. So.
Have you found, because you said Finn's now 20.
Yes.
As they grow up, have you found your parenting style has changed based on their age? So once they kind of develop a little bit more independence and a bit more kind of free-willed, do you find you have to approach it differently than you would, say, a younger child?
Definitely. I think every stage is completely different. So, you've got full responsibility, and they don't really, they're not able to compute so much as a newborn, obviously, and those early years. And now, say Addison is 9 tomorrow, and so you've got that. You've got more responsibility, I guess, at that age. Once they start hitting those teen years, it's about that kind of letting go and letting them do as much as possible. We should do that early on. So Addison's at that age when he wants to do absolutely everything. So there's a level of autonomy, and it's trying to safely allow them to do as much as possible. And then it's that you have to start letting go at that stage. So I think from the point they reach, 5 onwards, you start not to do the helicopter parenting kind of approach, and letting them do their own thing. Definitely there are the challenges, the hormonal, behavioural challenges that happen a lot when we get to kind of the teens, and then your socialisation. So you're no longer the person that's primarily influencing your children once they get to their teens. There's a lot more peer group.
It's got to be terrifying that though, hasn't it?
So so you've got they're trying to find their way, trying to find their identity, who they are in the world, and they're learning a lot from their friends, less from you as a parent. And that can be difficult for a parent, I think, to again, no, I want to mold you into this kind of human being, and they want to be a different
I know
kind
the
of,
best for you. Do this.
So that's when you get the kind of the critical piece coming back in again, because it's like, well, that's not the way I raised you, and that kind of. So it's very easy to start having those, I think, obstructions and conflicts in that period, because you're no longer the primary socialization for your child. It's and there's ranges of socialization younger as well, but when they get to their teens, and we had interesting times during our teens. Finn, if you're watching this, all is forgiven. And we had interesting times with teens, very, very challenging times. And it was, again, embracing that roller coaster of emotional intelligence, and think, wow, this is interesting. It's a struggle. You'll find your way through. But, developing good emotional regulation, hugely important, trying to model where as best as possible. And now Finn's in his 20s. He's a fully fledged adult. He's living independently. He's paying rent and all those kinds of things. And so then you end up sort of moving back into that adult kind of friend relationship almost. So you're no longer needed. Not you are needed, but you don't feel as needed or responsible. So you do shift constantly, I think.
I imagine the loss of control as they start aging often makes you kind of become more critical. That feeling of like, oh, I actually can't influence this person as much as I want. Therefore, you kind of try and do it in a more of an aggressive approach.
Yeah.
And it must be difficult.
It is, and I think again coming back, and we come back to this each episode. We've got that self-awareness, self-management. Those two quadrants of those personal competences are really important, because if you don't catch that you're doing it, you just end up compounding the problem. If you realise that your teenage child is trying to achieve something, they're trying to achieve a particular aim, and it might be they want to be part of a particular social group, or they want to act a particular way because they've got a particular idol or something that they look up to that isn't you anymore. And they want to be in this particular way or act in this particular way. And the second you say, no, you're not that person, that's not allowed, you're being critical, but you're also
pushing them in that direction.
You're also obstructing their goal. So that's a trigger for anger. So you're gonna trigger their anger. Which is also going to trigger you, because now someone is getting angry with you, and so you end up in this weird, vicious cycle. And so that self-awareness is, why am I dealing with this in this way, which is causing this to happen in this interaction? Is there a more effective way of me dealing with this? So we do that self-awareness piece so that we can then manage our own. The anger is going to be there. If you find that, or the disgust. Teenagers can be pretty dirty sometimes. Sometimes disgust is is there as well. So you'll have these emotions that are there. But how do we consciously? So we need to identify them and then consciously appraise them and label them. So okay, I'm feeling this way. What is the most appropriate response right now? And it might be that take a breath, walk away, don't say anything. I'll address this in a few minutes or later, or not, because it might be something you can just let go and deal with it. So I think those first two are really important. But obviously you need to keep an eye from a social awareness point of view on what's really going on for them. Yes, they're angry, but there could be other stuff underneath that. Why are they angry? Maybe they're sad. Maybe something's happened. There's lots of stuff that could have happened.
It's almost like a mental chess game in a way. And I don't want it to sound like it's all about beating your kid. But the reason why I think of it as a chess game is you have a goal. It might be the kid tidies his room. And quick and easy way to do that is you need to tidy your room. It's really, really dirty. There'll be resentment. It might take a while for the room to get clean because you'll be like, well, screw you. I'll do it in my own time, blah, blah, blah. But if you can have that self-awareness, that self-regulation run through the story in your mind, do the empathy again, put yourself in their shoes, and you run that through, yes, it might take you a couple of weeks to effectively get the message across in the way that you want, in the way that it's received. But in the long term, it's going to be much better and much more kind of conducive to a better relationship if you can play that slow strategy rather than just immediately going for the do this.
Yeah, definitely. And the tidying the room thing, I mean, we're talking like we were never kids, but we were those kids, right?
Oh, 100%, yeah.
And I remember, wallowing around in a dirty room when I was a teenager and stepping over things and, not making your bed and those kinds of stuff. And the last thing that you wanted to do was tidy your room. So it's quite easy to empathise, really, if you think back to those days. Now, there are some people out there that I'm sure were very, very tidy teenagers. I wasn't one of those. But when you did tidy, you remember when you had a tidy room?
You felt great, didn't you?
It was amazing. Yeah. All this space to do stuff. It was great. So my my middle son, hello, Ellis. So my middle son, his room's sometimes a complete mess. But when it's tidy and you walk in, I feel good. He feels good. There's so much stuff. So it's
great. Unbelievable.
But it's just what is the goal right now? It is not a tidy room. So it's great when it happens. But yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you on this podcast, I've been trying really, really hard not to ask you this prior to doing this, but do you have any tips, lessons that you've learned on your parenting journey that you can share with the audience, with me, that might help us on our own journey?
So I'm not a parenting guru in any way, shape, or form, and I think the first thing is you're your own parent, and you will make mistakes. Embrace it and learn. I think that's definitely the case. So I think self-awareness is important, but when it comes to the self-awareness, acknowledging that you've made mistakes and doing that conversation that we talked about earlier. So if you make a mistake, make the learnings from it, explain that to your children as well on this is why dad responded in this particular way, because that does model emotional intelligence. And then you can have an open conversation about those things. So I think talk to your children about emotions, teach them emotional language is really important. So help them to validate their own emotions, validate themselves, you validate their emotions, give them some language around feelings and emotion and why it's important to communicate. So allowing that dialogue and not the, sit down, be quiet. If you feel bad, go somewhere else. Or if you're grumpy, just go to your room. I can't be dealing with this right now. That kind of thing doesn't help because it just stews and that kind of stuff. Your own triggers, I think, are important.
Yeah.
I think it's when do you find yourself most irritable, for example, so when do you find those times when you've snapped, when you've said something, when you've done something that you regret, you've responded in a way, or you've reacted in a way that isn't the appropriate response. So we differentiate between reacting and responding, don't we?
We do. Go on, do you want to just explain the difference?
So I think, reacting is very much that there's been a trigger in the environment, assume behavior of your child, that there's been a trigger that's caused an emotional reaction. The impulses have flared, all of the psychophysiological stuff and the face and all that stuff happens. And then we react. So it's an automatic reaction. We just go, we shout, whatever happens. What we should be doing from an emotional intelligence point of view is, yes, the trigger is there. Yes, that might trigger an emotion. But at that point, when those impulses start, we can then identify that we're becoming emotional. We can consciously appraise that, label it, and then respond, not react. We respond effectively, given we've just appraised where we are, which takes us into a better position to then deal with it. So the post-condition, as we would call it. So we start with the pre-condition, work through the triggers and all that kind of stuff, all the way back to post-condition. And I think having that ability to even think back to those times where we've had those less effective communications with our children and think, what was happening there? What was it that caused me to act in that way? Why did I get so angry? Because that can sometimes inform us on
100%.
Is there a theme about the things that we're getting angry about? Is it tidiness? Is it back chat? Is it not eating your dinner? Is it those kinds of things? And where did that come from? Why are you so triggered by this? And I'm not saying you have to go into deep therapy or anything like that, but understanding those triggers, I think, are really important.
Yeah, that little mental run through, either after an event or, like you say, reflecting back, is a massive learning piece for trying to figure out how to be better next time.
Definitely, yeah. So I think probably validation, your own emotions, validating your children, teaching that emotionally intelligent vocabulary so that they can do emotional intelligence, modeling it well, understanding the triggers, the things that wind you up, noticing if there's any themes to those that you can think, okay, I behave like this because, maybe when you were a kid, your parents told you, so they gave you certain messages and you're trying to push them through as well. So I think those things there's lots of things, but I fail in all of those sometimes. And I think that probably one of the most important is don't beat yourself up. We all make mistakes, and it's about, as long as we're learning from them, I think that's probably the biggest one.
Nice. No, I like it.
How about you, though? Is there anything that you would...
The thing I learned just as kind of Kira started moving into talking was to pay attention. Like, that conversation is the most important thing in the world, because for the child it is. So when Kira used to come back from nursery, I mean, she's moving into school now, you'd ask her about a day, and she'd go into great detail about how the day was. And sometimes, like, your mind would go off and be like, oh, I've got to do a little bit of washing, and then I've got to run the bath for her and all that kind of stuff. And you kind of lose focus. And I caught myself doing it. And I was like, oh, you stop and refocus. And the more you engage with the child's conversation or story, it actually becomes fascinating. The insights kids have and the way they're able to understand the relationships and the dynamics going on at school is incredible. And I think I learned, after probably not giving those conversations as much attention as they deserved initially, that if you do really go in, pay absolutely 100% attention to the story that the kids are telling you, the faces light up, your face will light up, you'll learn a lot about your kid. And based on the conversation you can have back with them, they'll learn a lot about you as well. So that's something that I spend a lot of time in now. And that kind of leads me on to, and this one is potentially eyebrow raising, but I would encourage everyone to take the kid to the pub. It could be a coffee shop, but basically somewhere away from home, the distractions of home. And I've been doing this with Kira ever since she was in a pram, is I'd take her to the pub, it'd be me and a mum or me and a friend, and she'd sit with us and we'd have a conversation. And, when she was a baby, she couldn't engage in any way, shape or form, but she's learning. And then as she's got older and older and older, we probably do this once a week. So it might be a Sunday afternoon, we'll go sit in a pub, we'll have a conversation about absolutely anything, because, again, we don't have that distraction of home. So we're not talking about cleaning the room. We're not talking about what we're having for dinner. We're talking about, a camping trip we might be going on. We're talking about what the relationship with her friends are like at school, what Daddy's doing at work. And I think the lessons she develops from that uninterrupted conversation and the vocabulary that she picks up, like, her vocabulary is bonkers. And a lot of it, I think, is sitting around with adults giving her the time, letting her participate in the conversation, is super, super rewarding for them. And a pub itself, it's almost like a microcosm of the world.
Yeah.
And, that she's seeing all different types of people, old people, young people, people from different countries, different languages. So she's picking up on all this, and I think from a communicational kind of benefit, a kid can learn a lot sitting in a pub.
Yeah.
Could be a coffee place. Basically, anywhere where there's people and zero interruptions and conversation is kind of the purpose that you're there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we do that once a week. She'll have a fruit shoot, I'll have a beer, share a packet of crisps, and then just chat.
Fantastic. Yeah, and you covered so many things there as well. So I think it sounds like we've got the pub, coffee, whatever it is, but we've got a people watching playground there as well. So learning professional interactions as well as personal interactions is fantastic. But you also mentioned bringing us back to mindfulness as well, I think. And I think that adds into the element of self-awareness, self-management, the triggers and all of those elements. But you talked about that paying attention in the moment, listening to that conversation brings us back to that you need to being mindful, because we're often doing that thinking about work, thinking about whatever, or you're on your phone. I'm guilty of that. You've got the phone, you get emails or messages, offices in your hand, just put it down, have a conversation in the pub, in a cafe, at home, wherever it might be. But so there's so much, and keep learning, I think is the key.
Yeah. And kids will give you the opportunity to keep on learning.
Oh, they
will challenge you every single day.
They definitely will. And I think, given this is a parenting podcast, I'll give a quick shout out to Addison, Ellis, and Finn. You're all good lads.
Yeah, Kira, love you.
And we will see you on the next episode, which is coming up soon.
We will. All the best.
Take it easy.